Dave Talks Comics, Episode 45, Baltimore Comic-Con 2014, Part 3. Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comics I have read and cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com, on Twitter at Dave Talks Comics. Email can be sent to dave@davetalkscomics.com. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This podcast is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics and cartoons, I may spoil them in some way. Now, having said all that, some of that doesn't really apply in this case, because this episode, this is the third part of my coverage of my day at Baltimore Comic-Con. And I will be talking about first the Fred Hembeck panel, and then I'll be talking about my final trip around the showroom floor and things I bought, and a little bit of wrap-up on final thoughts on the con. The final panel of the day that I went to was at 4 o'clock. It was in a third room. Actually, it was in the room next to the room that the fanzine panel was in, and so I was a little concerned that there would be that noise, that whining feedback noise or whatever it was, and you could hear a little bit, but it wasn't as bad in this room where this panel took place. And this was another creator spotlight panel. I was originally going to go to the gender and comic books panel, which actually was in the same room where the fanzine panel took place. But I've heard that subject discussed I've heard it discussed at least a few times, especially on Word Balloon. And I decided that this creator, who was Fred Hembeck, I would rather go to. I had not seen him talk or heard him talk. I had not heard him on a podcast, at least not that I can remember. And so I decided to go to that panel. And I think it's a good thing that I did. I mean, first off, the panel wasn't very well attended. There probably wasn't more than a dozen people there to hear it, and it was a pretty big room. Not as big as some of the other, not as big as the room that the Dave Gibbons panel was in, but still, it could have accommodated 50, maybe even 100 people, for all the chairs they had there, maybe even 150, I don't know. But the moderator in this case was Robert Greenberger. Make sure I got that right. The moderator was, Bob Greenberger, it says here, not Robert. And he basically interviewed Fred for about an hour. And so he started at the beginning, which was how did he first discover comics, and Fred talked about being given comics when he was 6 years old by his father, a character named Spooky the Ghost, and I think was the first comic book he saw, but most of the stuff that he, and most of the comics that he got early on were like Harvey Comics or Dell Comics, and this is like the 1950s that we're talking about. So this is before the Silver Age. And this is probably after around the time of the Seduction of the Innocent, the book by Dr. Frederick Wortham, which led to congressional hearings and eventually led to the creation of the Comic Code Authority. And I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here. So getting back to Fred, he said what really got him interested in comics was the Bizarros, when the Bizarros started showing up, in Superman comic books. And that kind of, I guess he said it was because it was something wacky. It was something kind of different. He wasn't as interested, at least at that age, in the straightforward superhero stuff. Bob Greenberger asked him about influences. One name that he mentioned was Henry Boltinoff, who apparently did filler cartoons for some of these. And I've got to say, throughout this interview, Bob Greenberger did a great job of asking questions. I get the impression that Fred Hembeck is somebody who doesn't like to talk about himself a whole lot. And so he did not always, it took him a while to get comfortable, and he didn't always respond with stories. He sometimes, was one word or a few sentences, and that was it. It wasn't a paragraph or a page, in other words. But he talked about, he said something about, I wrote down something in here in my notes about Fantastic Four number 4 being an influence, and he didn't like monster comics. He mentioned that he graduated he went to 2 different schools, he said. Both of them were state schools, and he was originally from Buffalo, I believe, and the state schools in New York. And he graduated just before the Kubert School opened, which would have been in the late 70s, I believe 78 or something like that. And so he couldn't see himself going back to school, so he ended up doing some work for fanzines. And he took his work to DC Comics, and was rebuffed by the guy who looked at his work, who was Vinnie Coletta, which is kind of a joke, considering how often Vinnie Coletta is considered to be somebody a bit, well, okay, this isn't completely fair, but I'm really repeating things or trying to sum up what a lot of people have considered, Vinnie Coletta to be somebody who destroyed other people's artwork because he worked very fast, which is why he managed to hold on to a job in the business, as I understand it. And he didn't really take the time and effort to, and he rejected Fred Hembeck's work early on. Now, I have no idea what Fred Hembeck's work looked like at that point. I'm sure it didn't look like what it looks like today, or even what it looked like in the early 80s in the late 70s when I first saw it. So, but apparently the first person to give, from the big 2, because he'd had some work appear in fanzines and things like the Comics Buyer's Guide. Although, actually, I'm not sure if this may precede the Comics Buyer's Guide. The first person to give him a chance was Bill Mantlo. And apparently he was writing letters, and he would send stuff in, Fred Hembeck was, to Marvel and DC. And the first person to respond favorably was Bill Mantlo, and he wanted something for the comic book that he was writing at the time. And that comic book, at the time, he was writing Iron Man. So, I think, was that the thing that, I think he basically wanted, I think Hembeck had colored it and everything, and he wanted Hembeck to recreate it, which he did. And I think just in ink, no colors. And that was his first work at Marvel that got published. And I believe that preceded any work at DC. And that was in 78, which, okay, I must have my dates jumbled as far as the Kubert School goes. I'm not sure exactly when that, yeah, it couldn't have been 78. I should look that up, find out when the Kubert School started. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But prior to that, at that time, he was, Bob Greenberger asked him, he said he was working at a gas station because he wasn't making enough from doing these cartoons for fanzines and even little bit work for Marvel at first. And actually he said that while working at a gas station, one of the people who came by, a woman who came by to get her car filled, asked him what he did for a living, and he said he was drawing cartoons, and she was like, "Oh, my husband draws cartoons." And it turns out this was Bob Layton's wife, and so for a while, some of his first work, Fred Hembeck got work working on the backgrounds for Bob Layton, drawing backgrounds for Bob Layton. They talked a little bit about the Daily Planet, which was this piece, like I talked about in my first part of my coverage of the Baltimore Comic-Con, that there was a that ran in the back of DC Comics from about the mid to late 70s, or maybe mid 70s to early 80s, about 4 or 5 years, something like that. And it was kind of a piece where they would highlight upcoming stories in various comics, and they kind of made it look like a newspaper, the Daily Planet, but with a masthead and a picture or two and some news pieces, which were actually just advertisements, of course. But so he did pieces for the Daily Planet, and I can remember reading those when I was younger. And then they talked about how Eclipse wanted to collect his strips. He mentioned that his parents never really understood his work. They were supportive. I think he said he's an only child, and his parents were very supportive, but they never really understood it. And then we had an interesting moment when the lights went out. It took us about a minute or so to get them back on. I'm not sure exactly what happened. But the microphones are still working. They talked about his work at Marvel Age a bit, and I'm not as familiar with that, but then they did talk about the Fantastic Four Roast, which was a book that I bought back in I think it was 81 that it came out to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Fantastic Four. Now, he wrote the Fantastic Four Roast, and he did this beautiful wraparound cover, which shows all the various heroes from Marvel kind of hanging out, drinking cocktails. And if you haven't seen it, it's a great cover. I really should get a new copy of it, or a better copy, because I think my copy is fairly beat up. But he wrote it, and he did the layouts for it, and it's like every page is done by a different artist. And that's one I really should reread too, because I remember, it's a humor book. It's it's a roast after all. Bob Greenberger asked him about Brother Voodoo, because apparently he used to do a lot with Brother Voodoo, and And Bob Greenberger was asking, well, what's the origin of that? And he referenced there was a Comic-Con in Toronto that he went to back in, this must have been the 70s, because he said they had just announced the first DC Marvel book, which was a Superman Spider-Man book. I believe there was 2 of them done, but this was when the first one was announced, and Len Wein and Marv Wolfman were on a panel talking about it, and I guess one was for DC and one was for Marvel, and I think somebody asked, why Superman and Spider-Man, and apparently one of them responded, it's either that or Brother Voodoo and Brother Power the Geek, and apparently and there was something about that stuck with Fred Hembeck, and that's why he apparently did a lot with Brother Voodoo over the years. He talked about working with Bill Mantlo to write an issue. I don't know if it was just a single issue. I haven't looked this up, of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and the issue where the Black Cat, where Peter reveals his identity to the Black Cat, was Was it drawn by Fred Hembeck? I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up to figure out which issue that is. It's certainly not. Let me see if I can look this up quickly and find out. But of course, Bill Mantlo is the creator who gave Hembeck his first in at Marvel Comics, and did I mention the issue number? In Iron Man number 112. And I'm stalling here because I'm trying to look up this issue to see, maybe it wasn't Spectacular Spider-Man, because I don't see his, oh, wait a minute, that's writer, penciler. Did he pencil the issue? Is that it? Peter, no? Spectacular, oh, wait a minute, here it is. Number 86. Maybe that was it. The Black Cat's in there. So maybe this is the issue that, and that certainly looks like a Fred Hembeck cover. Well, pencilers are credited as Fred Hembeck and Al Milgrom. So I'm not sure how much Al Milgrom did and how much Fred Hembeck did. And there are no notes here. I'm looking on the comic book DB. Let's see, if I check the Grand Comics database and I look up Spectacular Spider-Man, let's see what I find. Maybe there will be a little more information here about, let's see, no, not the 2014, here it is, the 1976 series. I think it was issue 86, I said. Yes, here we go. Oh, it was Assistant Editors Month, where Al Milgrom was replaced with Fred Hembeck for this issue's important story. Spidey decides to show the Black Cat where he works, and they end up having to save J. Jonah Jameson from the Fly. Spidey decides to take the plunge and reveal his secret identity to the cat. Okay, so, well, maybe one of these days I'll get that issue, my hands on that issue, and read it. But back to the panel. I think one of the things he did talk about when it came to this issue was how he was really unprepared for it because he had not drawn an issue of a full issue of a comic book at this point, and this issue came out in January of '84. So this was after the Fantastic Four roast, but after all, the Fantastic Four roast was really a lot of talking heads, and this issue actually had a fight scene in it, and Mantlo was kind of like, okay, and then they fight. And apparently what he originally gave to Hembeck what Hembeck gave to him wasn't very good, and there was a bit of a disagreement there, and Mantlo was kind of put out that Hembeck couldn't just produce what he needed him to produce, and then they talked a little bit about how Ramona Fradon, who was a Golden Age or a Golden Silver Age creator, who came back, had a similar experience when working with Roy Thomas, although I don't know which book it was on, and maybe you remember I bought something from her. I bought a little drawing she did of Metamorpho, which was a character, I believe she was the first one to draw Metamorpho, although I'm not sure if she created him or not. But I think she's the first artist to work on Metamorpho. So they talked a little bit about how Fred works when he writes his own story, writes and draws his own stories. And he said he first writes a script and then he breaks it down into panels and then does roughs, does thumbnails. And they talked about Fred Hembeck Destroys the Marvel Universe and how it was originally conceived when Jim Shooter was still the editor-in-chief at Marvel, and how by the time it was ready to go to press, or by the time it was getting ready to go to press, or he was finishing it up, Shooter was fired, and Jim Shooter was a big part of the story, and so they didn't want to print it, and apparently you can read the whole thing on Fred Hembeck's website. And I don't know, maybe fredhembeck.com, I'm not sure. And apparently Vinnie Coletta inked it. So, although Fred Hembeck isn't sure if he remembers, he never brought up the subject of what Coletta had told him, a couple decades earlier about his work being no good. And also, originally it was going to be the role of Jim Shooter was replaced by the Punisher, and I've never read this story, so I think it's The Punisher Destroys the Marvel Universe is what got printed, but apparently there's more than one version, because the original version had Jim Shooter in it, then there's a version that has the Punisher in it, and there was something else in there that he talked about that had to be changed, I think. Yeah, there was something else. I can't recall. He talked a little bit about working with Stan Lee. Apparently he's worked with Stan Lee 3 times, although none of this work has ever seen print. And I don't think any of this is full-blown work, but he started to do work and basically worked on spec. Well, actually the first time he did. The second time he said he did get paid for it, but the first time he did not. And the third time, the first time was around 1990, the second time was around 2000, and the third time was just a couple years ago when Stan wanted him to do something with his tweets, his Twitter feed, and using selected tweets, wanted him to create some kind of a story. And Stan had approached him for this. He did not approach. In fact, I don't think he approached Stan for any of these 3. And they finished up by talking about some of the work he's done for other companies like Archie and First, other companies aside from DC and Marvel. So that was it for the Fred Hembeck panel. I thought it was good. It was entertaining. It was informative. I thought all 3 panels were good. I didn't feel like any of them was a dud. And I think I have been to a couple of panels that kind of left me wondering, well, that was a waste of time. But I was a little more careful this time in selecting subjects that I had not been to before, people I had not, although I had heard Dave Gibbons interviewed before. The interview I heard today it definitely covered material that I do not recall hearing before. And a lot of it was on his early career. So after the Fred Hembeck panel, it was 5:00. The show was open until 7. I really didn't want to spend any more money, but I decided I want to go back. I did want to go back downstairs to wander the floor again and look around at some areas which I hadn't looked at too carefully. And I was almost positive that I had seen a copy of that Iron Man issue that Fred Hembeck's first work for Marvel had appeared in that $3 box from Welcome Back Comics when I was first wandering the floor. And so when I went back downstairs, I went to their table, and sure enough, I found it. And so I now have a copy of the first Marvel comic that Fred Hembeck's work appeared in. And it cost me $3. I'd say it's in fine condition. It's not. There's no tears in the comic. One of the corners is bent, but other than that, it's still nice and shiny. Inside, I don't know. The ink in some pages is a little smudged, but not too badly. So, yeah, I wasn't supposed to pick up anything else, although I certainly was. I almost picked up an issue of Marvel Premiere. featuring the Jack of Hearts. But what I did end up picking up was some more issues of Iron Man. They had quite a few issues. At one point, I think I may have mentioned on the podcast, but I've been interested in reading some of Bill Mantlow's run on Iron Man, which ran basically from about 95 to 115. Now, they had most of it there. They may have had all of it except for issue 100. I'm not sure. Issue 100 goes for considerably more than the other issues. And the other thing is I found out recently that a lot of these issues are available on Marvel's digital website at $2 a piece. And this was $3. But I really liked some of these comic book covers, and part of the reason why I wanted to read some of these issues is because the Jack of Hearts appears in Iron Man for about 10 issues or something like that, from about like 103 to 113, something like that. So I ended up picking up Iron Man number 103, 104, 105, 106, and 107. And the reason why I picked up that many, well, I picked up 104 because I really liked the cover, and then I was looking at inside the issues to see if the story ended, and basically I basically ran through the end of this storyline, and maybe I should have picked up 101 and 102 as well. But 103 was the first issue that I'm looking at it right now, is the first issue that the Jack of Hearts shows up in. Not the very first appearance of the Jack of Hearts, but his first appearance in Iron Man. And so that's 5-issue run plus 112. I was going through the boxes. I found one other thing that's been on my list of things to find, and that was they had a bunch of issues of the Eternals, the Jack Kirby series that he did. I think this was after he returned to Marvel. Let's see, what's the date on this? This is 1978. No, wait, yes, 6? Hold on. 1976. So this is when he went back to Marvel, went back to doing his second run on Captain America, or maybe it was his third run on Captain America. But, so this is about the same time as he was doing the story that introduced Arnim Zola, and there's been 3 collections of that stuff. And actually the Eternal stuff has been collected also. But I had a complete run of the Eternals with the exception of one issue. There was one issue I was missing, and that was issue 6. And they had it. So I had to buy it. I didn't have a choice. Nobody was putting a gun to my head, but I didn't have a choice. I had to buy it. So I picked up 7 issues out of the $3 boxes. And most of these are, I'd say, in fine condition, very good to fine. But you honestly cannot find these comics online for less than $3, and then you're going to pay shipping and handling. So I think this is, or if you find them for less than that, they're in worse shape than these comics are in. So $21 for 7 issues. I think it was worth it. And that was about it. I looked around a little more, but I didn't buy anything else. I didn't stay till the bitter end. The show closed at 7, but I left around 6. I left a little before 6. It was probably 5:45 when I left the building. And I went back to my car, paid, and went to the, and drove home, basically, And so here I am, and so I had a good time. It was I went to 3 very good panels, like I said. Very happy with my choices and with the jobs that the people on the panels did. I'm very happy with the stuff I bought. Probably bought more than I should have. I spent about, I think, $59 on comics. I probably spent about close to $100 altogether on this show, and it was, and the other thing is that, honestly, I did not buy any artwork. I thought about it early on. I thought about going to Tom Zoller, who did a piece for me a couple years ago at Baltimore Comic-Con, but I didn't. I looked around, but I don't know. My heart wasn't in it into getting artwork this time, and so I didn't. And if you let enough time pass, this is the sort of thing you either need to be there multiple days, or else you need to get at it very early, so that they have something ready for you by the end of the day. And honestly, I'm very glad that I left when I did, because there was a terrific rainstorm, a tremendous rainstorm that came down later in the evening when I was driving home from the restaurant I went to for dinner. And, it was coming down so hard, and my windshield, my defogging system does not work very well in my car, which is 20 years old. And I was driving along University Boulevard from Wheaton back to where I live in Tacoma Park, and it was crazy. I was driving in an area along University where I'm usually doing 40 miles an hour. I was probably doing 15, or something like that. It was that bad, and it wasn't like people were passing me left and right either. I think everybody was driving like that. It was really tough to see with the way the rain was coming down, the way my windshield kept fogging up, and I was using a rag to clear it, but it would just fog up again, and it was really kind of scary. I'm glad I wasn't on the highway when the rain was coming down like that. But maybe I should have chosen a different road. I don't know. Anyway, so overall, on the whole, I'd say it was a successful show. I have another one coming up next week when I'm going to go to the Small Press Expo, which will be a little bit closer to home. And I will be spending 2 days there, at least that's the plan, or at least a day and a half. I may have to leave early on Sunday. But, on the whole, I would say, it was fairly busy at the Baltimore Comic-Con. The aisles were not as wide as they are at Heroes Con. I don't mind that too much. I was a little concerned that things would be too wide open, which is the way I felt about Heroes Con this year. But I didn't feel that. it was crowded. I don't mind it so long as you can still get around, even if you have to pause from time to time. I don't mind that much. If it gets to the point where it takes a half hour to walk from one end of the floor to the other, okay, that's ridiculous. But it wasn't like that. It was busy. It was definitely busy. Each time I went down to the showroom floor. Obviously least busy when I first got there because the show had just opened, but it was busy all day, and that was good to see, and that made me feel comfortable, I guess in part because I don't feel as much pressure from the people at the tables to approach them, or they don't seem quite as needy, or so I'm sure I'm going to go back to Baltimore Comic-Con next year. Assuming that something else more important doesn't interfere, like happened last year. But I had a good time, and maybe I'll do more than one day next year. Next year, it's going to be at the end of the month. It's not going to be at the beginning of the month. It's going to be at the end of September. I think the 25th to the 27th. Let's see, I'm looking at the book. Yes, the 25th to the 27th next year. So, because it's such a short drive, takes me 45 minutes to get up there, and I'd rather do it this way. I'd definitely go in next year, and so that's it for Baltimore Comic-Con. If I think of anything else, I'll record them. I'll do another recording, but for now, and probably that's it for Baltimore Comic-Con 2014. Okay, I just have a few more things I wanted to add. Comments. Some of these were about the Fred Hembeck panel, and some of them are about things that I bought, and some of them are about the show in general. First off, I mentioned Henry Boltinoff because during the Fred Hembeck panel section, because Fred had mentioned that he was somebody that had influenced him And I looked up Henry Boltinoff, and he was an artist and an editor, and he'd done a number of work, I think mostly for DC. And I believe what Fred had mentioned him in connection with is one of the things he was best known for was he used to do a feature called Hocus Pocus, Hocus Focus, which was something that showed up in some of these comic books, which was kind of a puzzle and type feature where you had to figure out, okay, they'd show you two pictures and what six things are different about these pictures, that sort of thing. So I'm going to include a link to. There is a Wikipedia page for Henry Boltinoff, but the Tunapedia page actually has a lot more information. And most interesting to me is that he was the editor for Challengers of the Unknown, the Golden Age, or Golden Silver Age. I'm not sure if Challengers of the Unknown originally appeared in, if they're considered to be Golden or Silver Age, but the Challengers of the Unknown and the Doom Patrol. And I'm not sure exactly which period, if it was throughout the run or if it was just the beginning, so I'm not sure if it was when Kirby was drawing it or not. But I thought that was interesting. Next thing, the Kubert School. I was unsure as to when it opened. It opened in 1976. So that means that Fred Hembeck must have graduated a couple of years earlier, so somewhere around 74. And I'll provide a link to the Wikipedia page for the Kubert School. Another thing that came up during the panel was the first DC Marvel crossover event, the Superman Spider-Man book, which he mentioned it in connection with Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, although I don't think either of them worked on it or wrote it. I'm not certain about that. But there is I did find a Wikipedia page about that, and I'll provide a link to that. Fred Hembeck destroys the Marvel Universe. Okay. On Fred Hembeck's site, he has quite a bit of information about this. He has a long story about how the story came to be, and he has a lot of the original art. So you can actually, I think, read the entire story. I did not read the entire story. I did not read the entire article. But it gives you a lot of the information that I think he talked about in the panel. And I am going to provide the audio for the panel once again in that M4A format, I believe it is. And so that will be available, but I'm not going to include it as part of a podcast episode. Okay, finally, as far as that's it for the Fred Hembeck panel. As far as the stuff I bought issues 103 to 107 of the Jack of Hearts, and I mistakenly said that 103 was the first issue that featured the Jack of Hearts. The first Iron Man issue that featured the Jack of Hearts, and I was wrong. It was actually 102, so I goofed. I should have gotten 102, but I didn't. But I don't know. It could be that it was just a cameo, like he just appeared on the last page of 102. I'm not sure, because I didn't buy it. And the only other thing that I can think of to mention is that the signage at... And this is a general comment about the con floor, is that I wish that the signage had been better. At Heroes Con, they do such a good job of indicating the aisles, which aisle you're in. All you have to do is look up, and you can see big signs telling you're in the such and such aisle, the 300 aisle, the 400 aisle, and so on and so forth. And it makes it a lot easier to figure out where you are. I believe at the Baltimore Comic Con, the only indications I saw of which aisle I was in was like at the ends of the aisles there would be like signs on the floor telling you. But of course, the way the foot traffic is, especially on Saturday, it makes it a little hard to figure out, to see those signs sometimes because they're on the floor because people are walking all over them. So I wish the signage was a little better, and in general I think that they there's room for them to improve the con. I don't think it's a bad convention, but I think there is room for them to improve it. I do still think that Heroes Con does a better job with in a number of areas, including the panels. I think they have some more interesting panels at better researched, and I wish that they had a movie panel like they seem to usually have at Heroes Con, or at least they have the last few times that I've gone. And then they have their super panel, which is, although they did do something like that with Fables, I didn't go to it. I believe it was 2 hours long. So maybe that's my loss. But the mega panels at Heroes Con usually aren't focused on one book. They're usually focused on a topic. So like an era, or I think they focused on a particular year a couple years ago in 2012 when I went. And last year I think it was music. It was comics and music. And this year it was censorship. So it's, as opposed to focusing on a particular book like this big panel, this 2 hour long panel at Baltimore did, focusing on Fables, which is probably a good subject. I just haven't read Fables, and there was other panels that conflicted with that I did want to go to. So that's basically it for Baltimore Comic-Con 2014. I am planning to go back next year. Maybe I can make it for 2 days next year. I don't know if I would go for all three, but it would be nice to go on Friday. Or maybe Saturday and Sunday, since Sunday seems to have the better panels. And I didn't have a problem, really, with the crowds on Saturday. I mean, it was crowded, but it wasn't like a mosh pit or anything. I mean, I felt like I could get around, and it wasn't bad at all. So I think I should cut it off right here, and that's it for the Baltimore Comic-Con for 2014. That's it for episode 45 of Dave Talks Comics. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about the Small Press Expo and what I did there, what I saw there, what I bought there, panels I went to, etc. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com. Questions or comments can be posted on the episode page at davetalkscomics.com, or you can tweet them to at davetalkscomics. You can also email your questions or comments to dave@davetalkscomics.com. Thank you for listening.